everyone. Lovely to meet you all virtually. My name is Maya Deangelo. I work for Smith and Nephew, and it's been really inspiring so far hearing from Ali and Arafat about their journeys. Um, I hope that I can share a different perspective, being a young woman and kind of very newly figuring out what I'm really passionate about, really, in my career. So, going back to my very humble beginnings in Iran. I was born in the Middle East. You can see why Elham's story and her start to this organization really inspired me and resonated, because we are from the same place. And I moved to the UK with my family when I was about 6 years old. And I'm now 25, to put things into perspective. So when I moved over here, I didn't speak any English. There was really no preparation for the move. It was very much the fact that my father felt like, having two daughters, we were more likely to have a brighter future in a country where equality is a bit more of a thing than in Iran, because of the unfortunate and political climate that there was. So we moved over here, and I was just put into school. There was no kind of plans for learning how to speak English. It was kind of figure out what everyone was saying using body language. And it gave me really good skills, I think, in terms of reading the room and figuring out what people were thinking without actually speaking. So the biggest challenge, I'd say, in my education early on was the language barrier. Once I figured that out, I very quickly realized I wasn't very academic. I was good at school and I'd get great grades, but it wasn't because I was really passionate about studying. It was just that my father was Middle Eastern and he really wanted me to study. And I think that will resonate with quite a few people who come from other countries, because our parents sacrificed so much to get us here for a brighter future. And naturally, they want us to do well academically. So I was always told that that was kind of number one priority in my life. So I excelled at the arts and other things at school, but the main thing was academics. So I went to University of Derby, lived in Nottingham, to give you a bit of an idea of, I never left home. I was very close with my family. So I studied at University of Derby, and I did business management with a focus on sales and marketing. I think it was quite evident early on that my strengths did lie in business management and on all things commercial, but I still had no clue at the stage what I wanted to do. I just knew that that's what I was good at. I was good at business, I was good at speaking to people, and I thought that's probably where I'll have the best shot in terms of spending money on a very expensive degree. So I ended up leaving university in the middle of COVID, hence the masked girl. That's not me, but I was class of 2020. And I graduated with a really terrible job market, where I had no real clear idea of where I wanted to go. To give you an idea, my grades were really good in school in everything apart from science. So the only thing I didn't contemplate was the career I actually ended up going down, which was pharmaceutical sales. And that was just due to having a friend who was doing it at the time, and they urged me to try it out. And I kept shutting down the idea because I just felt like I'd be no good at it, having no clinical background, no idea of how the science of it all works. Despite that, I interviewed for a 2-month long position. It was a temporary job with an agency, and that landed me a role with Securus for 2 months, which is a huge vaccine company, and it was selling flu vaccines to GPs and to pharmacies. And this was remote over the phone, and it was through a third party, so it wasn't a headcount role. I was told time after time, this will be a 2-month contract, then you'll go into redeployment and we'll find you another job in the industry, because the company didn't want permanent employees. It's a seasonal product, so you only sell it for flu season. So they had no capacity or desire to take anyone else on permanently. Now, in my first couple of weeks working at that job, I figured out very quickly it was very in line with what I wanted to do. I was super passionate. I learned all the science, and I realized actually I was limiting myself, because the things you're good at, but the things you can open yourself up. You've got the ability to learn. If you leave with a degree, you probably have the ability to learn. So, you can pick up things that you previously haven't been good at in school, and you shouldn't, shut yourself down. That was one of the key things I learned, because I enjoyed learning all the science, but I also enjoyed the impact and the part we played in the patient's journey. So we would get, the best deals to their GPs, would get the best kind of vaccines to them. And then at the end of the day, we'd get all the stats of how many people were vaccinated due to the work that we did. So I ended up working very hard at that job and securing myself a position from a 2-month contract to a permanent role. And I ended up staying there for 18 months. At 18 months, I felt, all right, I've done everything I can. I've progressed. I've done the team kind of lead roles where I'm training up other people and taking on additional tasks. There was really nowhere else to go in that role. And I was headhunted for a company called Promatica Digital, which was more on the software side of it. So I went from selling medication to GPs to selling software to the healthcare sector. And it was a big jump because it was a national business development role rather than a sales role. And I was put on a fast track program for account management. So I was essentially taught by these really experienced people how to map out new accounts, how to go in and plan our commercial activity. I was really the only person doing commercials because it was a tech startup. Everyone else was very technical. Now, the person who hired me was from a commercial background, so I felt like I was in great hands. But unfortunately, after 8 or 9 months of doing that, she got replaced by someone who had a technical background. So my mentorship, my guidance just kind of went out the window, and I suddenly I became the person who had to run the ship commercially. And it was a very humbling experience, because I sat down and I was like, I'm not ready. I'm not at that stage of my career where I can do this. It's a huge gap between where I should be to be able to do this task. And I've not got the right guidance anymore, because all the mentoring and everything. And this is where I found out what the value of mentoring was really. And I think in every role that you go into, you need to have some level of, despite being in management or wherever you may be in the organization, you still need someone there to mentor you and develop your skills, because everyone kind of needs to move forward. And I very quickly realized that the support wasn't there any longer, and I wasn't able to step up to that role. So I went back to the original agency that got me the Securus role, and I was very honest about what had happened. And they said, well, we've got a wound care role. Now, in what I've learned, I've put lack of passion is infectious. And this is where I nearly missed out on having my dream job, because in the time that I was looking for roles, I interviewed for another wound care role with one of our competitors, which I won't name. But this was an online interview with the hiring manager, and I knew nothing about wound care. But that person's attitude, the person who would have been my manager, that person's outlook, because I'm the sort of person that will ask you a lot of questions when I go to an interview, because I want to know what you think of the organization and what your experience is. And the impression that that person gave me is that they weren't passionate. Their product wasn't making much of a difference in the marketplace. There wasn't much room to expand and grow. And it just gave me an overall really negative mentality of like what wound care was, that it was this thing that didn't matter, and it was a small part of healthcare that didn't really have a huge impact. And me not being clinical, I paired that with the interview, and I was like, well, healthcare seems boring. Wound care seems boring. I don't want to go into wound care. I want to go into something more important in healthcare. So when this role came up with Smith and Nephew, and they said, well, it's a remote sales role, I said, well, I've interviewed for a role. I got offered it and I didn't want it because the person just seemed really bored with their life. And they said, well, why don't you sit down with the hiring manager and speak to them? So I sat down with the hiring manager for the role and I spoke to them. And obviously, me being here to 2.5 years later and going from a contract role to headcount and moving across the country to do this full time, I really learned that speaking to the wrong people with the wrong attitude can really make you miss out on opportunities, because a lack of passion and a lack of desire to actually fully immerse yourself into something can be quite infectious, and that goes with all types of energy. After speaking to the hiring manager, learning about the company, I've really found out that wound care essentially covers everything, from incision to kind of open wounds in the community to non-healing wounds, people that are really, really struggling with long-term wounds and wounds that are being mismanaged and how much they cost in the NHS. So it was a new world to me. I did that role for 18 months and I was certain that I didn't want to work anywhere else. I didn't want to do anything else. And all the progression that I wanted was within this company and specifically with my team. Now, I was based in Nottingham and the team I was working with covered Yorkshire and the Northeast all the way up to Scotland. And so when a vacancy came up in Yorkshire, I applied for it. And unfortunately, they didn't think that my experience was enough to cover the patch for Yorkshire. But they thought that I interviewed particularly well. So they offered me a role in Scotland. So I up and moved from Nottingham to Scotland. And for about 10 months, I was the account manager for half of Scotland. And it was the most brilliant experience. It was in surgical theatres, kind of advising our surgeons and our nurses how to use our wound care products, out in the community, doing healthcare audits and facilitating kind of healthcare improvement projects. And it was the best time of my life. And then after about 10 months, the Yorkshire role that I originally applied for came up again. And I went to my manager and I said, look, I've gone and gotten the experience. Would you consider me for this role so I can move a bit closer to my family? Because I've left them behind and gone to Scotland for 10 months. And she did. So as of 1st of April, I moved to Yorkshire to become the account manager for Yorkshire. And again, it's unlocked a whole new world of healthcare, commercials, just things that I never ever thought in my life I would be interested in or I'd be any good at. But it's just about opening yourself up to new experiences and not allowing other people's lack of passion to kind of withhold you from having your own experience of certain industries. And I think that pretty much covers my journey so far.
Thank you so much, Maya. And I think from your sort of career story, it just goes to show what you were selling in terms of vaccines to then going on to Smith & Nephew, learning about certain products to be able to then talk about it and sell it. And as you say, just keeping a very open mind and not letting anyone sort of cloud over any kind of ambition that you want to sort of go into. So that's great.